The year was 1692, when a chilling shadow descended upon the small coastal community of Salem Village, marking the beginning of a dark and tragic American era. Beneath the outward piety of the Puritan settlers lay a volatile mixture of religious zeal, political instability, and deep-seated personal grudges waiting for a single spark to ignite. The catalyst for the coming storm began in the home of Reverend Samuel Parris, where young girls started exhibiting strange, inexplicable behaviors that defied any known medical explanation. Doctors were summoned to examine the afflicted children, but their limited science could offer no cure, eventually leading to the terrifying diagnosis of witchcraft and direct demonic influence. Among those caught in the initial wave of accusations was Bridget Bishop, a local woman whose colorful attire and independent lifestyle made her an easy target for suspicion. Bishop was no stranger to the courts, having been previously accused of various minor offenses, which the townspeople now reinterpreted as evidence of her long-standing pact with Satan. On April 18th, a warrant was officially issued for her arrest, and the machinery of the colonial legal system began to turn with a relentless and lethal precision. Her examination took place at the local meeting house, a space usually reserved for holy worship that was now transformed into a theater of accusation and desperate, frantic defense. Magistrates John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin presided over the hearing, their faces etched with the solemnity of men who believed they were fighting a literal war against darkness. As Bishop entered the room, the afflicted girls immediately fell into violent fits, screaming that her specter was pinching them and biting their skin with invisible ghostly teeth. The court relied heavily on spectral evidence, a controversial legal concept where the testimony of the victims regarding ghostly visions was accepted as absolute proof of the defendant's guilt. Bridget Bishop stood before her accusers and firmly proclaimed her innocence, stating that she had never seen these children before, nor did she know anything of their suffering. However, her neighbors stepped forward to recount strange stories of her visiting them in their dreams, or of their cattle dying suddenly after having a disagreement with her. One witness claimed that Bishop's spirit had appeared in his chamber at night, a spectral visitor who moved with an unnatural grace and left him paralyzed with fear. Another testified that while working on her house, they found puppets inside the walls, small cloth dolls stuck with pins, which were considered primary tools of black magic. The hysteria in the courtroom reached a fever pitch as the physical reactions of the girls seemed perfectly synchronized with every movement Bishop made while standing at the bar. To the observers, this was undeniable proof that an invisible thread connected the witch to her victims, a diabolical bond that could only be broken by her ultimate destruction. On June 2nd, the newly formed Court of Oyer and Terminer convened specifically to handle the growing backlog of witchcraft cases that were paralyzing the entire Massachusetts Bay Colony. Chief Justice William Stoughton, a man of uncompromising religious conviction, led the proceedings with a determination to purge the evil from the land regardless of the human cost. Bridget Bishop was the first to be tried under this new authority, serving as the crucial test case for the legal arguments that would define the entire summer. Despite the lack of physical evidence, the jury returned a verdict of guilty within a single day, reflecting the overwhelming public pressure to find a scapegoat for misfortune. The death warrant was signed, and Bishop was returned to her cramped, cold cell to await the final execution of her sentence upon the heights of Gallows Hill. June 10, 1692, dawned with an unnatural stillness, as the High Sheriff prepared the cart that would transport the condemned woman through the crowded streets of Salem. The procession moved slowly, passing by the homes of people who had once been Bishop's friends, now turned into silent spectators or vocal critics of her alleged crimes. Bishop remained composed, her silence a stark contrast to the religious exhortations of the ministers who followed the cart, urging her to confess and save her immortal soul. The climb up the rocky incline toward the execution site was difficult, the uneven ground symbolic of the treacherous moral path the community had chosen to walk upon. At the summit, a large oak tree stood alone, its sturdy branches having been selected to serve as the grim instrument of the colony's swift and final judicial reaching. A large crowd had gathered, a mixture of the curious and the devout, all wanting to witness the moment when justice was served against the agents of the night. The High Sheriff read the execution order aloud, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the wind, declaring that Bridget Bishop was to be hanged until she was dead. She was led to the ladder, the rough hemp of the noose placed around her neck, yet she offered no final confession, maintaining her innocence until the very end. With a sudden movement, the support was removed, and Bridget Bishop became the first person to be legally executed during the infamous Salem Witchcraft Trials of that year. Her body remained suspended as a warning to others, a grisly silhouette against the sunset that signaled the start of a period of unprecedented legal and social chaos. The execution did not bring the peace the magistrates expected. Instead, it seemed to embolden the accusers, leading to a rapid increase in the number of new warrants. Soon the jail was overflowing with men and women from all walks of life, including respected church members and even a former minister of the Salem Village parish. The death of Bridget Bishop established a legal precedent that made it nearly impossible for the accused to defend themselves against the intangible evidence of supernatural and spectral harm. Throughout the summer of 1692, the hangings continued, with groups of victims being carted to the same hill to face the same fate as the unfortunate bishop. The atmosphere in the village became one of total paranoia, where a simple glance or a whispered word could be interpreted as a curse from a hidden witch. Families were torn apart as children testified against their parents, and husbands accused their wives, all under the immense pressure of a community gripped by a collective psychosis. Behind the spiritual concerns, historians have noted that many accusations followed the lines of old land disputes and economic rivalries that had festered in the village for decades. Bridget Bishop's property was seized by the state immediately after her death, highlighting the financial incentives that often accompanied the pursuit of those accused of practicing the craft. As the death toll rose, voices of dissent began to emerge from the surrounding towns, questioning the validity of the spectral evidence used to secure so many convictions. Increase Mather, a prominent influential minister, famously stated that it were better that 10 suspected witches should escape than one innocent person should be condemned to a death. By the autumn, the governor finally intervened, dissolving the special court and prohibiting any further use of spectral evidence in the remaining trials, effectively ending the violent hysteria. Those still in prison were eventually reprieved or pardoned, but for Bridget Bishop and 19 others, the change in the legal tide had come far too late to help. The community was left to grapple with the aftermath of their actions, facing the realization that they had executed innocent neighbors in a fit of misguided religious fervor. In the years following, several jurors and even one of the judges published formal apologies, seeking forgiveness for the blood they had helped to shed during that terrible summer. Ann Putnam Jr., one of the primary accusers, later stood before the congregation to confess that she had been deluded by Satan into accusing innocent people of witchcraft. The name of Bridget Bishop remained a mark of shame for the town for centuries, her story told as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked colonial fanaticism. Today, the site where she died is a quiet memorial, a place of reflection where visitors come to remember the high price of fear and the frailty of justice. Investigating the records reveals a woman who was simply different, a person who refused to conform to the narrow expectations of her society and paid the ultimate price. The patterns of Salem suggest that Bishop was a lightning rod for the community's anxieties. Her execution, a desperate attempt to restore order to a world that felt chaotic. Her death reminds us that the legal system is only as fair as the people who operate it, and that fear can easily subvert the principles of any law. We look back at 1692 not just as a historical curiosity, but as a mirror reflecting the persistent human tendency to hunt for enemies during times of crisis. The story of the first execution is the story of a broken community, where the bonds of neighborly love were replaced by the cold, hard steel of the gallows. Bridget Bishop's ghost, whether literal or metaphorical, continues to haunt the history of New England, a silent witness to the tragedy that unfolded on that rocky, windswept hill. Every document, every testimony, and every warrant serves as a paper trail leading back to the moment the first drop of blood was shed in the name of God. As we conclude our investigation, we must ask ourselves how easily such a fever could take hold again in a world still driven by fear and divided by belief. The lessons of Salem are written in the lives lost and the reputations destroyed, a permanent scar on the American conscience that serves as a vital, enduring warning. Bridget Bishop was a woman of flesh and blood, caught in a tide of history that she could not control, and her name shall forever be remembered here. Let this account serve as a tribute to the truth and a reminder that justice must always be tempered with mercy, lest we repeat the errors of the past.